Hello, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. This is Chris. It's a Leka Friday. Welcome back to the program. The 19th of November already. What the heck? Where did this year go? Feel like it's just been taken right out of our pockets and stolen from us. But welcome back to the channel. It's a special feature live stream with my guest, Michael Atkins. We'll get to him in just a moment. We're going to talk about election integrity in South Africa. Now, this stream is not about the Democratic Alliance, the African National Congress, the African Christian Democratic Party, the EFF, the IFP. It's not about parties. It's not about partisanship. It's about the integrity of elections. And so my guest has agreed to come on and talk about that. So I'll ask my audience to be respectful and stick to the topic at hand and not be doing any party bashing here. So let me welcome my guest in here. My guest is Michael Atkins, who is an election integrity analyst. And we're going to bring him in just now. He'll be joining me here. So once again, this conversation today is about election integrity. It's not a partisan conversation. So I do ask my guests in the chat to be respectful and stick to the topic. And with that, I'd like to welcome my guest. And Michael, how are you today? Oops, now it's gone again. Your mic is gone again. I can hear it. It's like the cable might come loose or something. Yeah, but not very well at all. It was better when we were on screen before ahead.
I haven't changed anything.
Okay. Whatever you did, that just must be a cable loose or something. It's perfect. Gotcha. Right. Gotcha. Don't move. Don't breathe.
Yes.
Michael, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you come on, and thank you very much for coming on short notice, and also about a very difficult topic to talk about in some corners.
Well, yes, it's mainly about numbers, which a lot of people shy away from. And there are perhaps some uncomfortable facts about the checking of the accuracy of our election results that, again, people don't seem to want to really take on board.
Well, it's interesting you say that because we have a similar phenomenon on this side where officials don't want to take a look at the data. They just want to stamp it free and fair and move on. You know, the IEC called this free and fair hours after it was finished. I'm like, how can you declare something free and fair when you haven't even certified the results yet? Well, that's just my position on it.
Yes, we have processes which have been in place for the past 20 years or so. They're a little inflexible, and just the analysis I have shows that a number of errors are not trapped by the verification and audit processes. This is a long-standing problem. I first observed it when I looked at the result data in 1999 and ran some database queries and compared numbers, and I was finding discrepancies. If you look in the same voting station for the same party between two different elections, the provincial and national, or the ward and the proportional representation, I was finding, there are discrepancies. And over the years, I've dug deeper, I've looked at it more closely, and I've now built my own system for quite a rigorous interrogation of the results. And I recognize the patterns now that come up quite often. So that's what I've been doing. I've been running queries, investigating, because you've got to take a hard look at each case. And then you discover, well, this does make sense, or no, it doesn't make sense.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned this because there could be systemic errors. I get that. But when you look at the data, a lot of people that don't deal with numbers and don't like to deal with data because it can be a bit overwhelming, intimidating, might go, okay, that's just too complicated. But I did see on your Twitter feed, I did see something recently where you gave an example from the 2021 municipal elections that it ought to be something anybody can grasp. You don't have to be a statistician to pick this out. And this was where you had precincts. I don't know what you call them there. They're within the wards. We call them voting stations, precincts here. But you had precincts in which there were more votes than registered voters. That's not. Now, I suppose that could be because the database is out of date, but it ought to send up flags and give, alert bells to people. Wait a second. How can we have 500 people vote when there's only 350 registered? Is that a common discrepancy?
Right. There's a moderate number. I think we have about 100 out of 23,000 voting stations.
It's not bad
with that issue.
Yeah.
But it is wrong. It has to be wrong. We did have some problems with the late registration that was reopened, and a number of people went to vote and found that they weren't on the voters' roll. But we have a process for that. It's called an MEC7 form. Mm-hmm. And in the voting stations I'm looking at with a percentage poll is over 100%, I'm also filtering out the fact that there are no MEC7 forms recorded to match people who perhaps didn't show up on the voters roll, but they did legitimately register. So that is a problem. And yes, it's a weakness that isn't being flagged, and it should be.
No, I think that's interesting because honestly, I wasn't even aware that you had a process for that. That's akin to what we call a provisional ballot on this side. And actually, a little personal history here. When I first became eligible to vote at 18, I was already deeply involved in politics. I was at university at the age of 17. I joined the Young Republicans at that time because that's what I was at the time. And I actually ran one of my classmates. I ran his campaign to get elected to city council. I wasn't of age to vote, but I ran his campaign. I was a campaign manager, and he won.
Yes.
He was the first student ever at Ohio University to win. So you can see I was really into politics. So the first time I was eligible to vote was after I turned 18, which is Christmas Day. So in the spring, we had a primary. And since I was registered a party in Ohio, I could vote. And I went to my polling station. I was working past 7, mopping floors, cleaning dishes at the cafeteria, making minimum wage. And I got on my bicycle, got across campus, got to my polling station, found my precinct, and it was after 7, but not 7:30 when the polls closed, and there was nobody there. I'm like, what? And they said, oh, no, he left. He left? I haven't voted. You're going to have to go to the courthouse. I get on my bicycle up this big hill to get to the courthouse in the center of town. I swung open the door of the Board of Elections. I've been disenfranchised. And that's what I said. And one of the county commissioners was there, and the chairman of the board said, hey, calm down, young man. Let's put this guy in the room. They went, they confirmed with my identification I was a registered voter, and I should have been allowed to vote. And they also confirmed that it wasn't 7:30, and there was nobody at the polls. So I did my first ever vote as a provisional ballot. Which is a process akin. Now, the thing about the MEC7 is that I didn't know about it, and I can be excused for not knowing about that process. I'm not exactly a South African or registered voter there. But in Hermanus at Finbos Park, where one of my viewers is at, we saw 80% of the people turned away, despite the fact they had a text or a message confirming they were registered to vote in that station in this election. And no one offered at the IEC to tell them about an MEC7. If I had known about that, I would have told my viewer, hey, tell us people not to leave and ask for an MEC7. Is that the responsibility of the IEC, or is it up to the voter to know that they can file a provisional ballot?
It is the responsibility of the electoral officials, the IEC people on the ground. And in general, the people in the polling stations do know what they're doing. In general, they're very helpful. They do their jobs properly. It's what I would call on the margins, where it is a huge exercise. You have 200,000 people employed, obviously not on the scale of a United States election, but for us, 200,000 people employed on a day. So inevitably there are problems.
Yeah. No, but I think, and I said this during the weekend because I did live coverage for 6 hours plus a couple interviews before the press. So 7 hours of straight coverage the weekend before the election, plus all I had done it with candidates and leaders of parties and such building up to it. But I did allow for this. It is a complicated process. And these were anomalies. I didn't get this from across the country. People saying, oh, I couldn't vote, or this happened, or there was people were campaigning. It was occasional. So, I mean, it was outliers, but it did happen. Now, when you're comparing your election hours, I think that actually probably you do a disservice in that respect. Let me explain why. We don't have a national election as such. Every election is handled by each state. So the largest state is California with like 38 million. So the number of workers that are handled by each state is in many cases smaller than your 200,000. So even though South Africa only has 60,000 people and 39,000 eligible voters, 26 million registered voters, and 12 million who bothered to show up and vote, the 200,000 still have a job that's there's still a larger group than most of our voting authorities here. So mostly outliers there. But the data, what are some of the other discrepancies that you've been finding in data? Because you've been looking at this for a number of years.
Right. The most typical faults are writing a 0 for a party's result rather than their number. Now, that tends to happen with the smaller parties. So they will get 0 in the ward election and 48 votes, for example, in the PR election. And we've had many, many individuals say, I voted for my party and I looked at the result and they got 0. That has anecdotally happened quite a lot. But with those smaller ones, it's happening upwards of 500 times across the country for smaller parties. And even in some of the larger parties, there are it's over 100 cases where you have a discrepancy of 200, 300 votes, naught, and then 350 for the other election. Then the next error is writing the result for one of the larger parties into a block for one of the smaller parties. Now, in Cape Town, the Democratic Alliance objected after the results were declared that a couple of their votes had been written into the blocks of smaller parties, and they did achieve a seat change during last week on the basis of that objection. But again, I'm looking into the hundreds of cases of that nature. And the problem is, this is generally speaking a mistake, but inherently it's not that certain that you can be sure that it is a mistake. So I don't wish to get into conspiracy theories, but we have one municipality in the Eastern Cape where the same mistake happened 7 times across a small municipality, where the ANC's vote was written into the same small party's vote. Their proportional representation tally was written into the same party's block. So what that does is that drops the ANC's vote in that municipality by 1,000 or so, and raises the smaller party's vote in that municipality by the same 1,000. So the problem with the inadequate audit and verification, they allow both errors to flourish and potentially allow fraud at a local level to flourish.
Well, and in fact, that's what this really is. This is a collection of elections, essentially, because it's a municipal level. It's not a national election. That's why it was such a big issue and why it's such a challenge. Of course, the Independent Electoral Commission sought to have this election delayed. They went to former Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke to do an investigation. Now, I've expressed my views on that, and people know how I feel about that whole process. But the effort there was to delay this. They said they couldn't hold a free and fair election. It wasn't time. And I question that, but given the number of difficulties we're coming across here, one has to wonder if it's simply, I mean, it can't be simply data errors. I mean, how do votes jump from one place to another? I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but as you said, votes got changed. It resulted in seat changes. I saw that in Western Cape, the Cape Independence Party and the UIM both complained about a couple of wards in Cape Town in which the Cape Independence Party claimed they got an additional 500 votes after recount. That's the figure the election officials came up with, not the Cape Independence Party. And the UIM gained a couple hundred votes. And these are in small precincts. So, I mean, that can make a difference. What is the answer here? Is it for a forensic audit of these things? Is it for better observation, better software? Any ideas on how these kind of anomalies can be addressed, assuming that they're not malicious or fraudulent?
Look, whether they're accidental or fraudulent, the approach is actually not difficult. And if I can engage in a spot of self-promotion here,
sure.
The system I have built for myself is in fact a working prototype of what the Commission could do. And my plan is to go to the Commission with a formal proposal to implement this. The thing that I add is I have a small number of false positives when I run my queries based on past experience. And these things are not new. I've observed this pattern in every single election from the year 1999. Now, essentially, you run the queries. It's not difficult. You identify unexpected patterns, and then you have a workflow for each individual discrepancy. Somebody looks at it. Does it make sense? Is it wrong? And you then send it to the affected parties for their input and comment. And you could resolve 80% of these errors before the declaration of the result, which is typically 3 days after the election, through a collaborative process with the parties and the Commission. And they do have a liaison committee, but they don't sit down and discuss 100 errors, 500 errors. But if they had a process where they picked these up proactively, and to be honest, I don't know what their audit process does pick up, because I'm seeing all of these as published, audited, verified results. And I'm not here to criticize or attack the IEC. I'm only looking at the numbers that I have in front of me on my computer, which I have seen in each election going back. So essentially, I'm coming forward to say, your audit needs to be revised. Here is a methodology. Here is a working system. Go ahead, be proactive, bring the parties in to discuss each error on its merits, recount if necessary, check the scan forms, because on their computer systems, the IEC does have a scan of every result sheet from every voting station. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to do this. I would also suggest an additional step of opening it up to public scrutiny. Mm-hmm. If the parties can see the list that I have in real time, and if they have easy click-through access to the scanned result sheets, most of these anomalies would be resolved in a very short order.
Well, and you actually have a big advantage there, because you're not dealing with the nonsense that's been going on over here, and I'll quite frankly call it nonsense, and that's mail-in balloting. You don't have that issue. Here, we used to only have federal absentee ballots for military stationed outside their home or abroad, or diplomats serving abroad, or people who were traveling on business couldn't be there at the ballot. But now we have this, no consequence, mail in, drop your letter, drop it off anywhere sort of thing. So at least you don't have to deal with those anomalies, because that, as we saw in 2020, can have a dramatic impact on what's happening in election results, and can string out how long it takes to certify and confirm things. So the 3 days, you're comfortable that with the process that you're talking about here, that they could adjudicate these things and 3 days later certify the results, because that's pretty quickly.
Look, the program always has been announce it 3 days after the election. They, by law, have 7 days to declare results. Perhaps they should be looking at 4 days. Mm-hmm. But with more manpower, what I have done works. Obviously, on my own, if I have 2,000 individual anomalies to look at, I'm not going to do it in 3 days. But it would not be difficult to call it democratize the process, bring the parties in, let them have a look at the anomalies themselves, and very quickly you would get feedback from party agents. And a lot of the things that I've been highlighting on Twitter would be understood and resolved in very short order.
Well, one of my viewers has asked the question, who happens to be a pilot. That's coincidental. No reflection on the question. But he says, can I ask my guest his view on integrating blockchain technology into the voting? Any thoughts on that? That's all the rage with folks, blockchain.
Right. My opinion, and this is my own view.
Yes.
I would not go near any of your election machines that you use in the States. I would not go near blockchain. Mm-hmm. As an IT professional, I understand the security of blockchain. I would stay with a completely paper-based system. And my reasoning is straightforward. Although we have these problems, and then the problems need to be fixed, it is physically possible to go and double-check a result.
Yep.
And it does not require an expert to certify that the result has not been compromised. Now, I am a moderate level expert. I'm an IT guy. I can write some database queries. I understand the process. I'm good at numbers. So yes, maybe I'm unusual in that regard. But if you are talking about any kind of electronic technology to bring the votes in, it may be secure, but you're having very rare IT specialists being the ones to put the stamp of approval and say this result has not been compromised, or it has. And the pool of skills able to do that is so small, you don't need to compromise the election. You just need to control the person who certifies it. And the ordinary people then have to trust that specialist. Specialists can be bought. Mm-hmm. So my view is there is a completely different philosophy. Although this keeps the logistics difficult, the different philosophy is keep it on paper, but have completely open computer systems so that every strange number combination that ever exists is openly visible to political parties, voters, the media, and the queries that I write, the discrepancies that I throw up, be visible to anybody who's curious. That way, nobody could ever pretend that the election had been stolen. Or so you've got a two-way process. One is errors will be found.
Mm-hmm.
The second is nobody can falsely allege that it has been rigged.
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example. In Mgani municipality, which is the Howick area in KwaZulu-Natal.
Where the DA won this time for the first time.
Yes. So there's a voting station there where every single ward vote was awarded to the EFF. 392 votes, ward votes were valid, ward votes were cast, and every single one of them is written against the EFF.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't take very long of a local voter looking at that to spot this is not right. So now, in that particular case, there's a very strong possibility that the independent candidate won that ward, whereas in fact the ANC won the ward because the independent candidate was potentially denied 200 or so of those votes. Now, if those types of anomalies were surfaced quickly and easily, which is what I do, I have a set of 15 queries that I run to pick up every kind of discrepancy that I've encountered over the years. Another discrepancy is the sum of the ward and PR votes gets written in the ward block. I saw it happen twice in 2011. It happened 5 times in 2016. And I have 13 occurrences of that in this election. Well, and what that does, that floods in a whole lot of extra votes, which affects the seat calculation.
No doubt, and it definitely is a problem. As far as your view on blockchain and technology, I'm violently in agreement with you 100%. I've been a coder. I've written code for back in the days of BASIC and COBOL and Fortran and stuff like that. I've built computers. I've been using computers since as a kid. I put IBM data punch cards in to load the instructions, and that's how long.
Yes.
And cassette tapes to load the operating system and Commodore machines. So I've been doing it for a while. But I don't trust it at all. The difference you've clearly pointed out is the key here is that those digits go in there. There's no transparency there. You have to trust a group of people. Whereas with a piece of paper, it's physical. Anybody with even out in education can look at and see a mark or a punch or a filled in circle on a piece of paper, and we can review that stuff. The only question you have there is the security of those. If it's under control, you have to trust the officials. But if you have a paper trail, you can physically audit it, and that's the key thing here. We have 12 different electronic voting systems machines approved by different providers in this state alone. That's disturbing from the outset. 12 different providers providing equipment. So already, in my view, because our Constitution says everyone has to be treated the same as a voter, I think we're already being treated differently. We have Dominion machines here that I vote on. And there's other ones. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't subscribe to any of the conspiracy theories around Dominion and the various other machines.
Yep.
There are some fairly outlandish claims that have been made.
That's true.
But I have read about the ethical hacker conferences where they have sat down with a collection of those voting machines as a challenge to see how quick it is to get in and compromise them. Mm-hmm. And the reports from IT security guys and call it the ethical hackers is very entertaining reading about the different means of compromising and how many minutes or seconds it takes for a person to gain control of one of those machines via a thumb drive stuck in the back. The various Windows operating systems, which Windows is not a secure operating system. So yes, it is very entertaining what can be done with them and how quickly it can be accomplished.
Yeah, no, my chuckle wasn't because I'm attributing anything to the rumors of Dominion. My chuckle is because of the rumors of Dominion. That's why I laugh at it. No, but my point is that I agree with you with the, and then I think Arctic just said here that agree, but we've seen boxes of ballots found and lost all over. True. True, but that goes to the integrity of the polling station and the people. So for those in the audience who don't know, I stood for election as a write-in candidate for judge of elections on November 2nd. Our election was the day after yours, right, Michael. And I stood as a write-in candidate because there was no one on the ballot. There was no one on the ballot because the previous official had been threatened because of the last election, the 2020 election, and then the primaries. In the primary, one party had no ballots for their candidates by 10 o'clock in the morning. They opened at 7:30, and by 10 o'clock, they were out of ballots. By the way, this party leans in that direction politically, or this county leans that direction politically, so it's particularly egregious. It was an effort, many are claiming, to suppress the vote. And there were several hundred people who showed up at the polling station where I vote at who went home and never came back. So, I mean, anecdotal, but the point is that I was angered about that for both party and for the integrity of the election. And so when I saw no one on the ballot in that primary, I wrote myself down, but you have to have 10 votes to move on to the ballot in the general election. So in the fall, when I got the ballot 6 weeks before the election, I saw that neither party had anyone or no independent listed for the office. I stood and I ran, and I won by a margin of 3-1 over the next closest person that ran against me. So I will be judge of elections. I'm waiting for my certification. It's supposed to be issued on Monday, and then my acceptance, and then I will be overseeing the polling station. And my point is that they have the machines there, which will make my job more difficult. I can only make sure that they're being used properly. But when you have paper ballots, you have something physical. You just have to ensure the integrity of the people. But when it goes into electrons, how do you ensure that? Listen, the United States Office of OMB, the management personnel, OMP, the management personnel guys here for the federal government allowed hackers without their knowledge for 18 months to break into the security clearance database, which has the most sensitive information, all the personal data, identifying information, personal histories, family members, creditors, any accusations, allegations of misconduct against 23 million American security clearance holders, including myself. All our data is in the hands of the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Russians. And if that database, which should be among the most secure on the planet, is hacked into by people, I have no confidence in electronic systems. And I don't want to hear about blockchain, because blockchain, no, physical. I'm sticking with that. And it sounds like Michael agrees with me on the physical aspect.
Very much. You see, it isn't, can you protect your system? It's, can you certify that you have protected your system? And the skill and the ability to do that is such a rare commodity in the IT world. Information security is a small subset of the IT world. Mm-hmm. And the level to be able to operate at that stage to certify that you have not been compromised is such a scarce skill, you can't rely on it.
Yep. Absolutely great. Now, you don't have to address this, but just kind of a cheeky comment here that came from Paulie, who's actually the person who asked me to get you on as a guest. So that's why I'll read his comment. He says, Mike's system will be too efficient for the IEC and wouldn't allow them a way around to any favors for certain parties. We'll leave it at that.
I can actually comment and answer it.
Okay, go ahead.
I have never, I do not, and I have never alleged that the commission itself engages in direct favoritism or any form of deliberate rigging or anything else. The critique that I offer for the commission is that they are like any bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. No organization likes to admit that they have problems. So they have to declare this election is free and fair. So I don't turn around and say, how can you do that? I don't rant and rave. I perfectly understand. My son is at a university that also has a hierarchy and a bureaucracy that is very difficult to deal with. You know, they had construction in his residence during examinations. And that was a battle royal to get that stopped, because hierarchies protect themselves. Now, what I would love to convey is admitting fault and taking appropriate steps to correct that fault engenders trust at a far higher level than pretending there is no problem. So, you know, you have this in business, this Japanese concept of continuous improvement. It's known as kaizen, where you continually review your processes and you seek to improve them. Now, we could, in our electoral processes, have that kaizen philosophy where accuracy is the mantra, And every election, every cycle, every issue is a learning experience, and the improvement of accuracy is a collective aim. And yes, you point fingers where things are done wrong, but you do it to get a better outcome. Mm-hmm. And if that philosophy is adopted, I see great possibilities for both increasing the accuracy of elections substantially and ramping up the trust simply by dealing with problems, addressing them openly, and moving forward, and having greater transparency over that.
Well, and ultimately, that's you and I are talking about the same thing here. That's why I asked you to come on as a guest. We're talking about election integrity. That's what really it's all about. It's not about parties or candidates. It's about the integrity of the election and the confidence and trust in the system. I would say that the confidence and trust in the U.S. election, there's no U.S. election system. I got to say that up front.
Yes, I understand.
You get that, but for my audience, because people like your system, no, we don't have a system. We got 50 states and 4 territories. Every state conducts it differently, and that's just how it works. But how we conduct elections in America, confidence in that is taking a body blow after 2020, and with good reason. But many of the issues that existed in 2020 pre-existed, and they were never on a scale that drew this kind of attention. Also, we never saw such wild swings in the middle of the night when people added in mail-in ballots. That really took a lot of the confidence out of this election. And ultimately, that's what you have to have. If you want to have a government of the people, for the people, by the people, you have to have confidence in your election system. Because the case you're talking about, Umgeni in KZN, that might have been the difference between a ward councillor. Now, I don't know who the parties are, and I don't know who the candidates are. I don't really care. I don't have a dog in the fight here. But that might be the difference between an honest person who ran for office to make a difference and will contribute to improving municipal services and governance for that city, and a corrupt official who gets in who could have disastrous impact for the residents. That's how important this is. It's about integrity and the right result, and not who the party is.
If I can mention another example.
Sure.
In the Northwest Province, in the Zeerust area, I always look at the numbers. It's NW385. Mm-hmm. There was a voting station where the EFF was awarded 17 ward votes. In the district council, they had 18, but in the PR, they had 197. Now, what you look for then, was there an independent candidate? Because they suck up a lot of votes and then they're not there. No, there wasn't. And then you look at the ballots cast, and the ballots cast show the same discrepancy. So it is very simple. An extra digit has been written. Now, sometimes you can see where a digit has been left off, and there is 1,000 votes too few in one of the elections. Now, these errors can happen easily. My whole thesis is that they can be caught. So I followed up that anomaly, and because of a proliferation of parties, so we have more political parties standing, we have definitely more local parties contesting elections this time around. Yep. And because of a lower turnout, you have a lot of seats that are allocated on remainder votes. I don't know if people are aware that each seat is worth a certain quota of votes. 2,000 votes in a small municipality is a seat. If you have 30 parties, everyone has a remainder, and then 5 or 8 of the seats in that municipality get allocated on the parties with the largest remainders. Because of many parties, because of low voter turnout, sometimes those remainders are very close. And something I've done for the first time in this election, I wrote a query to see which municipalities have the closest remainders. Mm-hmm. So there are 3 municipalities in the country where the separation between the last remainder seat being allocated and the first party not to get the seat, there are 3 municipalities where a single vote makes the difference.
Wow.
Now, in this particular municipality, there is a small party called Forum for Democrats. They contested about 4 or 5 municipalities in Northwest Province.
Now, which one was this? You said 3 what?
385, NW 385.
385, because I'm looking at
the and people can find it on the website if you follow the links for the election results.
That's okay. That's Zeyrust, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, in Ward 8, there was this EFF result. Now, what happens is the EFF were 30 or so, actually, I can't remember the exact number, but a relatively small number of votes ahead of this small local party called Forum for Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
So when the EFF loses 180 votes, I say lose, but they are corrected and their inaccurate result is corrected, they have 180 fewer votes. It changes that remainder calculation. And if that is the only fault, and if that is a genuine error, which I'm convinced it is, because I looked at the 2016 result for the EFF, I looked at the EFF's results in the remainder of that ward, and nothing else was consistent with the EFF getting 197 votes in that PR election. Uh-huh. So I looked on the IEC website today. I found a contact detail for Forum for Democrats. I sent an SMS to the convener, if you like, of that party. We had a phone conversation today. I have emailed them the details. They are going to lodge an objection, albeit a late objection in terms of Section 65 of the Municipal Electoral Act. And if the commission, if the IEC turns them down, they have recourse to the Electoral Court. So I'm hoping to get a test case to demonstrate that even a small error in a single voting station can be material to the outcome. Mm-hmm. Now, routinely, what happens in particularly smaller parties object to errors in their voting station, and they get told, no, it's not material to the outcome. And they get told that before the outcome is known and before all possible errors have been considered. And when you have 3 or 4 or 5 errors in a particular area, those errors can compound each other or they can nullify each other. So when the DA, for example, got their extra seat in Cape Town last week, I promptly posted on Twitter 4 errors involving the ANC, which would have added 1,000 votes to the ANC total, which would have given the ANC the seat that the DA had just taken. Mm-hmm. But I was cheating. I was cherry picking. Because I'm also aware of other errors in Cape Town where the DA did not object, where there's 500 votes that should go to the DA that haven't. Mm-hmm. And those errors are still there, waiting to be looked at. But when you reject an error, it is mathematically impossible before the result is declared to tell a person this objection is not material to the outcome. It is a defective mathematical understanding. And as a former maths teacher myself and as a numbers person, that is an offensive concept to me. I can't stand the idea that people get told, no, this isn't material, when the person saying that has no possible clue that that is the case.
Now, so I can make sure I understand this correctly. So back to Zeyrust in Northwest. Yes. Okay, so the Forum for Democrats, that's the FFD is the symbol, I think, yes, for the party. Okay, so that's the party you're saying that has lost a seat because of what appears to be a misallocation. Okay, because there's another party here which I'm not familiar with, the F4SD. I have no idea what that is. Some other party.
They are another local party that for 2 or 3 elections now has contested a number of municipalities, Forum for Service Delivery. And this is a personal preference. I'm at local government very much in favor of locally based parties contesting elections and serving their communities.
Sure.
I can't comment on the particular merits of individual parties, but F4SD is a similar example of a locally based collection of people who are contesting their elections.
Now, let me ask you this question, Michael, because maybe I just don't know how to handle this properly from the IEC's website, but to get the kind of level of detail you're talking about, like the 2 different things, don't answer this directly now, but in a moment, the one like where you report that there were this many registered voters and this many voted, I don't know how to find that on their site, but more directly to this question. So I'm frustrated by the IEC site because they give percentages of votes, but not actual votes on the column to the right side when you look at it. So for instance, I'm looking right now at Northwest 385, which isn't called Zeros it's called Ramoshera Moloa. But anyway, so they've got the party, the council, if they're leading, who's got control, and then the number of seats allocated based on wards and proportional representation, and then the support. It doesn't give the actual vote. The vote totals you have to come over, and when you click on it, it only shows the top 3 vote getters. So how do I find out where these votes were and which were for the FFD?
Look, to be honest, I don't ever look at the dashboard, which you will be looking at.
Right.
Section on the IEC website, if you follow the link that says elections, and then there is downloadable election results.
Okay, you're pulling up the PDF generated reports.
Yes.
Okay, now, fair enough. Okay.
Maybe I'm giving away a trade secret here, but I download all of the Excel files.
Right.
And I read the data from the Excel files into my database, and then I run queries in my own database.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That makes sense. It's just
yes.
It's not as easy to get to as I think it should be. But I mean, that's just a personal view. But okay, so
yes.
now I understand how you're getting it. So because it's frustrating on the dashboard because it should list the vote count on the right, not the percent, I mean, and not just the percent of support. So you know, but okay, so that makes sense. But boy, Zeros is all over the place. I mean, the ANC's got the bulk of the votes, but I mean, Freedom Front Plus did well here. The DA didn't do so well, but this Forum for Service Delivery did very well. Local party. Yeah, with as far as the selection goes, I mean, municipal, I've told people that small parties need to pay attention. Last year, I started reporting already in June of last year when the lockdown was first eased a bit after the famous 21 days. That was a lot longer than 21 days at Ramaphosa. I had to get the hospitals ready. By the way, there's fewer critical care beds in South Africa today than there was when we started this last year because the Charlotte Mackeksa Hospital being torched, among other things. But anyway, so in June when this was eased last year, I told opposition parties, I said, you need to get out now. You need to campaign. Politics is a blood sport, 365 days a year, 7 days a week. You need to recruit people to your standard, especially in municipal elections, because it's direct. You are in contact with the voter, and this is your chance. In a municipal election, 31 to 38% of the eligible population vote. The smaller number of voters, the better chance for an independent candidate or a small party to gain a seat. Because instead of needing 10,000, you might need 1,100. And it's a lot easier to get 1,100 votes than it is to get 10,000. And I think my admonitions over the past year have fallen on deaf ears, with the exception of a few parties. You can look at the difference here very clearly in how increasing nothing can have a major impact in an election, because the ANC support cratered. They lost 2.5 million votes across the nation, especially in KZN, and they really got pummeled there. The IFP only gained 8,000 votes. So they had 638,000 out of 649. So they gained 2% of the vote. But they gained over 122 additional seats, and the Freedom Front Plus did go from 115,000 votes to 276, which is a big jump. But they went from 67 seats to 221. And that's the point I was making about how these elections at the municipal level can be turned over a small number of votes, which is kind of ties into your point about we've got to count the votes correctly.
Now, if I can talk about the smaller parties, and I don't mind discussing parties in an objective sense.
Sure.
I was in favor of smaller local parties. In the metros, they have tended to get single seats or very small numbers of seats. So there is a local group in Nelson Mandela Bay, the Abantu Integrity Movement, AIM. They have been going for a year. They've worked hard. They've got good branding, strong local candidates. They only got a single seat in their municipality. They did what you said they should be doing. And on the margins, you are getting a number of these smaller parties getting single seats. But what has not been looked at is in the rural areas, a lot of local associations are getting seats, sometimes 3 or 4 seats out of 13, going to a previously unknown party or association. Occasionally, this happens where there is like former ANC candidates have gone. There was a group in the Free State who were expelled for exposing corruption, and then they formed their own party, and they have performed strongly.
MAP 16, I think that is.
Yes. Now, there are throughout KwaZulu-Natal, I have not quantified this, I haven't had time, but throughout KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Northwest Province, Eastern Cape to an extent, there are multiple parties of this nature that contest 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 local elections and are getting for the size of municipalities, significant numbers of seats. And yes, when the vote turnout is low, the margin of error becomes very small. So my query where I identified the gap in votes between getting the last seat and then not, 50 votes and below, there are 50 municipalities out of 213 where the margin is 50 votes or less.
Wow.
And by my reckoning, I'm sitting at 15 that I would call confirmed seat change errors in that set because of the low margins. There's one municipality in Gauteng, small municipality, the Heidelberg area. It's GT 423, I think it is. Lesedi is the name of the municipality. There is a single vote separating the party who gets the last remainder seat and the next party. And that next party had a voting station where they had 0 votes in the PR, in the ward, and 10 votes in the PR. So the question is, go to your party agents, go to your candidates, get affidavits of people who voted for your party in the ward, because 2 voters with affidavits changes the result of that municipality.
Wow. I mean, that's again, that goes back, Michael, to my point that in a municipal election, every vote counts, and that's so frustrating to watch people turn out in such abysmally low numbers. I mean, of 39 million eligible South Africans, 26 million why bother to register if you're not going to go vote? Only 11.9 million people actually showed up at the polls. There's a super chat here from Paulie, who's a person again who asked me to get you on. Said, excellent answer, fascinating chat. Thanks for coming on, Mike. And then someone else asked the question. Arctic says, Mike must have been a hell of a maths teacher. I'm sure he expected his students to do better than 30% on the matrix, though. So.
Well, on that score, I have given extra maths lessons. Sort of my children went through school, and I've given extra maths lessons. So I still love teaching.
Well, Paulie says, is he an actuary or just a systems analyst professionally? Mike is sharp. So my audience has been impacted by load shedding. We've got that number placed right now. So it's so a number of people have dropped off because they lost their connection, but others have come on. I guess they got power back. But yeah, apparently the audience is enjoying this conversation about what you've got to say about this. It is I think I don't know, it is fascinating, but I mean I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit disturbing too. Is that the processes don't seem to be in place that should be in place.
Our electoral systems were excellent. Mm-hmm. We really have a good infrastructure, but they were designed, the laws were written and the systems were designed in the late 1990s. And there have been improvements, and in certain areas, obviously, but substantially those systems have remained the same. And the audit and verification is too stilted and rigid and inflexible. And I'm hoping to gather the momentum through talking to civil society, through talking to political parties, to go to the IEC with a positive proposal to say to them, why don't you engage in an exercise of pursuing accuracy, of pursuing continuous improvement? You will increase the trust in your election substantially. And venturing into the sort of more political realm, in 2024 national and provincial elections, we could have 1 or 2 more provinces where the 50% threshold is tested. And at that point, you really want to know that your elections are accurate. If, let's say, the ANC in Gauteng gets 51% and they are below that currently, if they get 51% in 2024, you want to know that that result is accurate, because otherwise there will be accusations of rigging flying. Mm-hmm. Or if they get below 50%, the ANC will then turn around and say, hey, our elections have been rigged, this is cheating. Mm-hmm. So whichever way it goes, whether you have a call it regime change, if you excuse the term, or not, an administration change, either way, you want full confidence that your results are accurate. Now, my own philosophy, call it a self-serving philosophy or self-promoting one, is the attention to detail that I'm showing, to my mind, is the only way forward, coupled with what you could term radical transparency.
Well, I like that phrase, radical transparency. The opaque nature of elections is really frustrating in many jurisdictions around the world. And the thing I have about this is it's interesting that the people that most directly benefit or suffer from this, well, the people obviously do, but I mean, so far as achieving office or having power, are politicians. And they seem reticent to have this sort of scrutiny and attention put over these elections, whether it's there or here. I mean, in Pennsylvania, we have something called the SURE system, which is the database that's supposed to have all the correct information on who's eligible to vote, registered voters, felons, so they can't vote, that sort of thing. And we've found out that repeatedly that it's wildly inaccurate. And there's no stomach in the legislature. I met with my state representative last night about this. What are we doing to fix the SURE system? There's no stomach. This is a Republican-led legislature in a state, and they are the ones who suffered the most from the problems associated with the database in the 2020 choosing. That's what I call it. It wasn't an election. I called it choosing. But the 2020 choosing, they're the ones who suffered the most, and they seem to have no stomach for bringing this sort of scrutiny and transparency to elections. And I don't understand why politicians wouldn't be more interested in this unless they're benefiting from it. But people benefit and are harmed from it, and I don't know why they don't want to push for it.
The problem with our system of objections as well is that it's too stilted. And like I say, the Forum for Democrats in Zeerust, they had no concept that A, there was an error in a voting station affecting the EFF, and B, that could possibly have affected them. What made the difference for me was to make it easier to understand. I converted the fractional differences between the parties per municipality into a number of votes. So I could then, and then obviously you sort them by the smallest number of votes. So I've got now this time around a handle on which municipalities are very close. Now, parties don't know that they must object to other parties' results. And there is a thing where 2 days after the election, when objections, the first deadline for objections is, you have fatigue setting in. You also find that people are more interested in the politics of the results than they are in the accuracy of the results.
Yep.
And this is true across the board for people in political parties. Every party has their own internal politics of who's getting in on which list and how do you organize. And there's a lot of decisions to be made within parties as those results clarify. Then, of course, the politics of coalitions and everything else. And then the media as well are not following that. And because it's numbers, people, I think, mentally shy away from it. So I'm trying to demystify it in a sense, the process and the seat calculation process, and show that these are things we should be looking at carefully.
No, well, that makes a lot of sense. I like that phrase. People are more interested in the politics of the results than they are in the accuracy of the results. I think that's spot on. It seems it definitely was the case here. I can attest to that. I was up for 14 hours doing live stream coverage of the events that took place here in November last year, and people are definitely more interested in the politics of it than the actual accuracy of it. And that's a bit disturbing.
If I may give you a small anecdotal example. Sure. Ahead of the 2016 election, Mr. Malema, in a press conference, made comments that in 2014 they stole votes from us in Alexandra Township. Now, he is correct. When I say stole, it was accidental or otherwise. But the Zion Christian Church in Alexandra Township, which is a tiny enclave next to Sandton in Johannesburg, yes, there was a voting station where in the provincial election, the EFF had 104 votes. And in that same voting station in the national election, they had 0 votes. Now, that is not correct. I can tell you that 104 people don't decide differently in terms of splitting their ballot. And it's very easy to write a 0 instead of a party's number. Now, I knew, because I knew about that example, having done it in real time. the only sort of answer that I would give to him, if I were to say it sort of lightheartedly, is in 2014, I was at the National Results Centre as an independent observer. I saw that discrepancy in real time before the objections were submitted, and I handed that discrepancy to the EFF table at the Results Centre in Pretoria before objections closed, along with 39 other similar discrepancies involving the EFF. So that I mentioned earlier, it's the small party zeros if I can borrow sort of an American reference, at one stage I was calling it, zero dark 30, where I was saying 0 and 30 is my threshold for saying, no, there's something wrong here in this thing. But that is just a very frequent thing. But for me, what struck me this time, it's not just numbers. It is people who have been disenfranchised. You mentioned that in your own experience. Mm-hmm. So within hours, if you like, of the results starting to come through, I became aware of 10 people, I have the names of 10 people in Durban who saw 0 for their party in their voting station that they voted for. Mm-hmm. And I was, like the Cape Independence people in Cape Town, I was starting to hear stories. And it struck me, one lady said, it doesn't change the result, but I feel sad that my vote didn't count. Mm-hmm. And we have a history in this country of excluding people from voting. Yeah. And it is a particularly bad history, whatever terminology you want to argue with it. Some people talk about, was this a crime against humanity or not? That's not the point. Right. It was a particularly egregious history where the large majority of people were not afforded the dignity of voting. So now we have this. And yet, through carelessness or fraud, 50 people here, 100 people there, their right to vote has been discarded. They have been disenfranchised. And even throughout Africa, in many places, the right to vote is a hard-won right. Mm-hmm. How can we discard that right to vote through not being accurate enough?
Yep. No, I agree with you 100%. And so just very quickly to share with you, Michael, as I said, I ran as a writing candidate and I won. But on the ballot for writing candidate, because the machine prints out where people, because you have to circle for a writing candidate, that you're yes. voting for that position, then you have to write a name. And of course, Judge Judy and Mickey Mouse were among the people in the write-in, but yes. So they're excluded, of course, because for mine, I'd handed out a postcard that I made. It looks something like this. It's just a printout of it. So, it looked like this. And I made yes. my case for the voters at the polling station, because we're allowed to campaign on election day just within a distance from the polling station. Sure. So I made my case, and that's how I got people to vote for me. But a number of people failed to put my middle initial. So it comes up as 2 candidates on the ballot. Obviously, they meant to vote for me. The will of the voter was to vote for me. They didn't just pick that name and think there's another William Wyatt in this voting. There's only 5,000 people in this district. Anyway, so I went to the Board of Elections on Monday of this week when they were looking at the preliminary certification results, and I went up before the board and made my case to try to get the will of the voter recognized. I had won by a margin of 2-1. This would give me a 3-1 margin, getting those additional votes. But it wasn't about getting the votes. It was about ensuring that those people who voted for me, who listened to my case and yes. agreed that I was the right person for that and chose to vote for me for whatever reason, they should get their vote counted. And that's how seriously I take it. As I told you the story about my first time voting, that's why I think this is so important. I agree with you that there's a history of excluding people from voting around the world. It's not just in South Africa. In our country, initially only landed gentry were the ones allowed to vote, yes. and only white males. And then later, people thought about, well, blacks have been excluded from this, that in America. Well, that's true. But black men could vote for nearly a century before white women could vote in this country. Yes. So people forget about that too. So it wasn't until 1920 that we had that amendment. So we have extended the franchise, and we have made it eligible. It used to be 21, now it's 18. So the people who are able to vote, should they choose to vote, their vote should be counted. And if they can't prove who they are at the polling station, that shouldn't be the end of the discussion. It should be an MEC7 or a provisional ballot that's filled out and then verify that it was a legitimate person, they didn't vote elsewhere, and then count their vote after the fact. I think it's an especially egregious, and I am dismayed at the lack of interest of politicians in my state, in my country, and in South Africa about counting the votes of people. It's not a trivial thing. It's not just politics. It's a civic responsibility. It is a right, and it should not be infringed upon. And when those people were turned away at Fimbos Park and they never got the vote, their right to franchise was stolen from them by either incompetent, inept, or corrupt officials. I think it was incompetent.
You know, if you think philosophically about that moment you stand in the voting booth and you make your mark, at that moment, every person in the country is worth the same.
Exactly.
There is no other point in our whole life where we are worth the same as any other person. There is no high, low, rich, poor, educated, not educated. I don't go with a qualified franchise because there is this point where as human beings, we have inherent dignity and we have inherent worth. And that worth is demonstrated most clearly in that voting booth. And I cannot imagine how we can disturb the sanctity of the voting booth at that moment. And that's what drives me in my passion to see electoral integrity.
Well, I agree with you 100%. Look, I'm a person of privilege. At least I didn't grow up that way. I lived in abject poverty, no plumbing, used an outhouse or outdoor privy to go to the bathroom, fetch water from a cistern to bathe and to cook with, and then milk cows and collected eggs and, baled hay and all that stuff, and didn't have money to go to university. Got full ride because of my poverty level. And I agree. At the age of 17, I had virtually no money to my name. But when I went and they allowed me to file my provisional ballot, I felt that my dignity had been respected there and that I was equal to anyone else, whether it was the billionaire in Columbus or it was the big landowner down the street or it was a business owner. I felt that I was the same. And some people may look at me and go, well, what are you talking about? Those people need to get that stuff out of their mind. We're all Homo sapiens. We all come into this world pretty much the same way. Some come by C-section. The rest of us make it through the canal. But we all basically come to the world the same way. And we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And we choose to form a polity. And a polity chooses to form a government, whether it was us or our forefathers that made this system of governance ahead of us. And in South Africa, you still have people alive today like yourself that were there when that government was formed, that process. In my case, it's a system inherited from a couple hundred years ago. But polities form governments to represent their collective needs. And one of the ways we get to choose is we get to vote. And yeah, so amen. I'm with you on that one. It's the sanctity of the vote. And, like this writing candidacy, if I had lost, frankly, it wouldn't have been a big deal because being the judge of elections is a thankless task, as you can imagine.
Yes.
It is. It isn't a paid position. I don't get a big title and a big chain around my neck.
Yes.
I get to be the person when people are unhappy at the polling station, they want to yell at me and I have to pull them aside so we don't have a ruckus. And I'm the one that has to call the sheriff or the police if there's trouble and also have people remove that sort of thing and make sure that the poll workers are being honest. So it's thankless, but if I had lost, it would have been no big deal. But to me, again, a lot of people say it's trivial because it took 3 hours of my time to drive down there, appear before the board. But to me, the people who took the time to vote, their vote should count. And I think that's the bottom line. So that's what you're concerned about. I think that, Michael, let me ask you this question. Do you think you were treated fairly? And do we keep to the topic and discuss things in the fashion that you'd hope to?
I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion, and thank you. Obviously none of us is free of political opinions and outlooks, but for me, the validity of the electoral process is a multi-decade, multi-generational value and priority that rises above the politics of the day. So much as I'm fascinated by the politics, it is what I see I can do for the country going forward, and it is something that the country needs going forward to be seized by the imperative of accurate election results.
Well, and I would reinforce what you're saying, and I would say this is especially more perilous time as the electorate that does bother to vote is more and more divided. The ANC's majority has disappeared across the country by and large, except for Limpopo and Mpumalanga and Eastern Cape. And as we move forward in more contentious results, trust and confidence in the voting system has to be paramount. Otherwise, we could see all kinds of nonsense and civil disorder and endless lawsuits coming. So trust and confidence in that system, I think, should be the most important. Someone asked the question earlier, if I could ask this of you, Michael, I don't know if you want to answer it, but will you play a more active role in the 2024 election in some official capacity? In other words, as an independent observer. You mentioned you've been an observer in the past. Are you envisioning contributing in some way in a larger fashion or hoping to in 2024?
Right. My plan is to take my system to the IEC and urge them to build a system of that nature. And in a spot of self-promotion, I will be advancing myself as the person who's best placed to oversee that process from both an election and an IT perspective. If they receive that, I know, because I've been doing it, how we would design such a system. If they choose not to do it, logically the alternative is to go the NGO, non-government association route, get some backing, and what I've done over 2.5 weeks can be done in real time, independently. The systems, the technologies are all available. It was merely a question of resources and time that prevented me from being able to build my own fully working system in this election. So it's quite difficult to go out there and say to people, support my vision, but either we go through the IEC or we push it independently and give the political parties the tools to lodge objections before the deadline. And yes, so that's my aim.
Well, that's an interesting one. I think it's a noble aim. And regardless of whether you do something more in the future, or you continue the analysis you're doing, you have clearly brought to light a number of anomalies that should ring alarm bells and people should pay attention to. The example you just gave there of the Forum for Democracy, I think it was in Zeros, that's an interesting one right there. That may have an impact, a positive impact for that group, which had no idea that they may have been, I don't want to say cheated, but they came out on the short end of the stick and they shouldn't have come out on the short end of the stick. That's probably a fair way to say it. So that's, I think, a worthwhile public service to render, and thank you for that. Appreciate you bringing these things to light. Again, not being a numbers guy, although I like investing, but not being a numbers guy from a numbers standpoint, some of the stuff gets a little complicated. But it's pretty easy to me as a layperson to go 233 registered voters, 500 votes. Something smells funny here. Either the database is wrong, or somebody's cheating, or there's some kind of correlation error here. So thank you for bringing those things to light. We really appreciate it. You're welcome to come back on the program sometime in the future if you'd like to talk about this a little bit more. If we find some more out after the post-mortem on this election is finalized, because we might see some revotes here sometime soon. We'll see what happens with that. There's a lot of municipalities where coalitions aren't being formed.
Although there is one case, and it's something that I hadn't looked at in the law. There's a word in the law that I hadn't scrutinized. In Section 65 of the Act, the Commission, in considering an objection, may rescind the result in that voting station. And there is a case in Bushbuck Ridge, the Atlas Primary School, Ward 16 of Bushbuck Ridge, where on the 4th of November, there was a result published. A few days later, there was no result published, and the spreadsheet and PDF file say no data. And I inquired of the IEC and got a response back yesterday. No, due to objections, that result was withdrawn. So the seat calculation for that municipality was carried out without that voting station. It was nullified. So I have politely asked the particular manager who responded to me for the reason why the result was rescinded rather than there being a recount or other form of resolution, and of the nature of the objections that led to this. Because it becomes a bit disturbing if individual results can be discarded on a technicality. Now, Now, as it happens, I've been speaking to one political party about 2 or 3 other objections in the same municipality, which could affect a seat change in that municipality. Now, the votes that the ANC got in that voting station that was now rescinded could change that objection back and nullify the errors that I have pointed out to another political party. So I'm waiting with bated breath to see what happens, both with the objection process and secondly with the query about why that voting station's results was simply rescinded.
That's a pretty frightening prospect, especially if it's not publicly announced and explained why, some sort of decision issued to tell people that's happened. Because if you voted and you don't even know that your votes were just discarded, that's very disheartening.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate coming to the program. Again, as I said, be happy to have you come back on at some point. Obviously, you're busy looking at what's going on. Things are still not resolved in this crazy election. I think we now have 4 coalitions out of 66 hung municipalities, places like Cedarburg and then in Kanaland. Well, Kanaland, where the ICOSA, the local community group, has reelected a child rapist as mayor and a convicted fraudster as deputy mayor. Sometimes in Cloud Cuckoo Land South, as I call South Africa these days, a reference to Margaret Thatcher's reference to Rhodesia as Cloud Cuckoo Land. You just have to shake your head. But thank you so much for coming on. And if I could ask you to just wait in the waiting room for a moment, I want to ask you a question or two once I go off the air, but I have to close out the program. I'll give you the last chance to share anything you like, Michael, with the audience about the election integrity or just about what's going on. Anything you want to share with the audience before I put you in the waiting room?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's just that I would love to see this radically transparent approach that I'm advocating, where you have a continuous improvement in accuracy. And that I would love to see that adopted as a value. And I see that as having huge benefit for the country as a whole.
I think it's brilliant. I love the phrase radically transparent. That's like one of my favorite phrases. I'm in violent agreement with you. I love that.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. All right, Michael Atkins, election analyst, has been with us today. I'm going to put him in the waiting room, and then please hang around for a minute. I'll be with you in just a moment, Mike. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so let me put him in the waiting room. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning into this. Just stay around. I'm going to end this stream, and then in about 15 minutes, it's time for Indaba Africa News of the Day with the news and headlines from across the continent of Africa with a focus on Southern Africa and South Africa in particular. So stick with us. Switching from rugby broadcast on one channel to this discussion about election integrity, and then it's time for the news. So come back. We'll see you here shortly. Thanks a lot, folks. Be sure to smash the like button on your way out if you're new and not a subscriber. Hey, it costs nothing. You don't have to be a paying member to support independent journalism. Just be a subscriber and help us grow the subscriber base and overcome the shadow banning for reporting the facts. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you at the bottom of the hour here on Chris Wyatt Africa for Indaba Africa News of the Day. Bye-bye, dankie, ke leboha, merci mille fois, vielen Dank. Cheers, everybody.